I mean, I can't believe it's been so long. I'm embarrassed that Manning told you all, but don't believe it. That's right. But you know, when Professor Warren first was kind enough to invite me to come to class, I started to think, what possibly could I share about myself, about my career and life, that would hopefully be helpful in some way to you and to your career and to you personally. And as I was thinking, the first thought that came to my mind literally was, I remember vividly being in exactly the same seat that you're in, even though it was a long time ago. I remember being in this seat, and I remember having a lot of, I don't know if you're like me, but when I was in law school, I had a lot of doubts about what I was doing in law school and what's next. What's next to do with the degree. What's possible in business in my career, and I was swirling around, even second guessing until maybe third year. It was too late what in the world I was doing in law school. But I was so grateful that I was able to do it. And so not only about what was next that was swirling in my mind, but also how in the world am I going to get there, even if I can imagine what is next, how in the world am I going to get there. And honestly, the first thing I'll tell you is that those questions never go away. So maybe that'll bring a little comfort to you and a little bit of inspiration. If you're hungry and you're ambitious, which you all are, I mean, I really congratulate you, even though I know it's probably no fun sometimes burning the midnight oil in law school, but education and spending money and time on educating yourself is the best investment you can ever make. And I know that seems trite, but it's so true, and especially the older I get and the more mistakes I make in business and life, I fall back on my education. And honestly, I look at education as it's an investment in yourself, and it's one of the few things where you can really, if you think about it, you can control the return on investment. It's yourself and your commitment to your ambitions and to your passions. And so don't ever give up on that hunger, no matter how hard it may seem. So you have a little bit about me. I mean, I was really interested in learning about you all. I'm happy to maybe start with the question that you posed, which is, how did I transition from being a sort of traditional practitioner to business? And I will tell you that it didn't happen intentionally. It wasn't, some super purposely driven, goal-oriented path. I came to law school probably a little bit like some of you in this room, wanting an advanced degree, wanting to educate myself, but not sure if I wanted to practice in a traditional way. And maybe I'll just say, how many people in the class are thinking about a non-traditional path? Okay. It's probably more than it was back in 1999, but I'm glad to hear that. So when I graduated, I had student loan debt, and I was lucky enough, I did well enough with the help of my friends in class to get a job, and I got a job offer from Stites and Harbison, and I honestly was kicking and screaming. It was a position in litigation, and I knew at least enough about what I thought I wanted that I knew I didn't want to be some litigator. I never envisioned myself as a big orator and cracking the cases, so to speak. I was always interested in business. I actually worked in banking right out of college, so I think that whet my appetite a little bit with business. And Professor Warren's class enabled me to do a little bit of a deeper dive on the law side in business and corporations, and I was very fortunate to have that experience. But I took the job. I felt like I needed it, and I wanted to legitimize the degree in some way and practice as as I think is a good idea. I know the legal education landscape has changed a lot since I've been here, but the practical side of what you're learning doesn't necessarily come until you get out and do it and have some at-bats, as I call it. So I wanted to do that, and Stites gave me the opportunity, and they also said this offer, if we have an opening outside of litigation, once you join our firm, you'll have an opportunity to move into the corporate and business and transactional space, which is where I felt I wanted to be. I didn't know enough. You don't know what you don't know, but you know maybe a little bit. You have a instinct or a gut. And I knew business and transactions and corporate law was something of interest, and so lo and behold, 6 months after I was there, a position came open in the business and corporations area, and I started to cut my teeth. I didn't know anything about anything, but I was lucky to learn from some junior associates, and did just basic taking business transactions to record, papering deals, doing simple contracts. We represented the airport authority when the airport authority, I can't believe I'm going to say this because this really ages me. This was back when the airport authority was just engaging in its expansion. And our firm, Kennedy Helm, as you probably remember, was lead counsel, and so I was able to carry briefcases and sit in on meetings and try to learn as much as I could about business and development and the law side of that. And I was with Stites for 3 years, and this was right about the time the big real estate, the capital markets boom of the 04 and 05 era started to hit, and so I spent 6 months in the corporate and business area, and then was invited to come into the commercial real estate area, which is where I felt like I really had an interest from my prior lending experience. So it was very lucky, but also I was not afraid to ask and push the partners to let me know when there was something that would be available. I would love to add value, and I look back on it, and I had something that may not happen these days. It's a little unusual, but I call it an unofficial rotation, like you would have in medical school or in your residency, where I was able to go into the litigation area. We did big document production work. We did a lot of stuff. I had some motion practice that I did in my first few months, and having that was a very short time frame of 6 to 8 months each area, but I got to touch and feel a little bit of all the areas of the law firm, and ended up practicing a good bit again in the business and real estate side. And I knew that in my heart of hearts, even in law school, even sitting in your seats, that I didn't want to be billing every 6 minutes of my time. And that is not for everybody, but there's some, a lot of my great friends are super successful that do it and love it, and it just wasn't for me. And honestly, it was a little bit through failure that I sort of learned that this wasn't what I'm meant to be. I just felt like I wasn't doing as well. It's hard to capture every 6 minutes, and I just had a tough time, just me personally, and I think that's part of life, is you learn what you're good at and what you're not so good at, and over time you try at least to gravitate towards your strengths and maybe try to tuck your weaknesses away, or learn to delegate those away. So I kind of got knocked around a little bit, honestly, and still not knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I started to explore, started to talk to clients actually about learning about how they got where they are, and how did they start, and everybody has a different story, and it was, you all know that. I mean, you're well read, and you know a ton of people. every story is different, and so every client I talked to had a unique perspective, but I just kind of listened as I was closing real estate transactions. We represented a lot of lenders at the time in conduit lending, and so it was super standardized. I was holed up in my office for 10 hours a day grinding out paperwork, but I was able to meet some great people on the other side of the table, and I always knew that maybe I didn't always know, but I felt a calling to be on the other side of the table, maybe be more of the entrepreneur and less of the super intelligent, diligent, detailed lawyer who's super important to take your deal to record and to guide you through the jungle of transactions. And I was lucky enough to get an offer at a boutique firm that was looking for a general counsel to handle some very small legal stuff they had in the property and asset management world. And I was just, I think you all know this and you hear it all the time, but I was just crazy enough and just had enough, I guess, courage to do it. And I think that's the big thing is I probably could still be practicing law today and grinding away, and I'm sure I'd be happy, and I'm sure I would have found a unique way. But I just kind of, you gotta sometimes go where you don't necessarily know what's ahead of you, and you don't necessarily know where to connect the dots, but you follow your instincts. And I was just very fortunate to do that, and so that's really how the pivot started, was as general counsel, and I was working on a lot of legal stuff, and then as slowly as general counsel you get introduced to more business matters, more things about the business that are maybe less legal, less, I wasn't necessarily advising, say, a homeowners association, or I wasn't drafting a master deed to take to record. I was giving more business advice that tied the real estate or business law together. And I just felt like I wanted to do that more than practice law, and that was sort of an introduction to maybe this whole thing makes sense, that there's so many people. I mean, I chose this law school in part because it has a history of great business people who may have practiced for a while but are great executives. Some may have never practiced, but they chose to have a law degree as sort of a well-rounded graduate degree to help them in business. And I'm living proof that even a slow-witted guy like me from Frankfurt can take a law degree and leverage it and do some fun things. And so back to the general counsel days, I was dabbling as general counsel in business stuff and real estate transactions, and seeing some of the really exciting things that were happening and making transactions happen from literally nothing, and bringing parties together like you would be in terms of a matchmaker, bringing a buyer and a seller, or an investor and a seller together in a commercial property. And slowly I just kind of got the less legal work. I kind of pushed it away as I was trying to balance taking a baby step into the real estate brokerage arena. And that's really how it happened. It was a slow, sort of methodical process where I slowly just chose over time to do less law work and more business and real estate work while being a general counsel at a small firm. And then as often is the case with, I think I looked at your all syllabus, I think you all may study family transitions and family businesses.
Sometimes.
So this was a small business, and I think he was looking at me as a young person who might be a legacy plan for him, the owner and primary principal.
Right, so this is why to put it in the time capsule. This is at the same time that you're general counsel.
Yes.
For what is it, Williamson Commercial. Okay. While you're still there, you have this discussion.
Well, I'm still there with yes.
Okay.
So when I'm at Williamson Commercial Group, he approaches me and says, I see that you're really interested in doing more business, less law. I get it. This is great. I see you as a potential legacy plan for me. I would like to retire, and would you be interested in buying my business? And I was in some sense, but I also I knew too much. That's part of the problem, is I knew, not that there was anything untoward, but I knew a lot about, things that weren't necessarily what I would want to be doing, and a lot of things internally that he had. As his lawyer, I had to know. I had to go out and protect him and fix things that happened out in the business world. And so I was super grateful. Those opportunities don't come around very often, but they will if you're not afraid to put yourself in a position to go with a small firm and even go and be general counsel, or just offer to help, offer to add value in any way as a lawyer. And so we talked a lot about it, and I looked at valuation, and we looked at how we could structure a deal. But at the end of the day, I just didn't feel super passionate about making that acquisition or that investment. And we could have done a lot of different ways we could have done it. We could have structured it in terms of a seller financed transaction, where he would have a little risk to bear as I was going forward and taking what he had built and growing it. And so it was a tough decision, but it was the right one for me and for him. And I ended up leaving on great terms. I helped him as much as I could, and he ended up selling part of his business to one of his partners, and I helped facilitate that. That was the property management business, the asset management business, which I was frankly most interested in. I also knew a lot about with regard to some of the kinks that he had that were going to be super difficult to unwind, and helped him structure that transaction and successfully structure his retirement. So I went out on my own. After that, I decided instead of buying his company or in some way finding equity to go buy his business, I decided to start my own. And I actually I had no idea how I was going to do it. I started in the basement of my house. Just with an idea. At the time, I had my real estate license, because as general counsel at this firm, I was dabbling in handling transactions as a non-lawyer from time to time, and so having that license, frankly, helped me keep my lights on at night and pay my mortgage.
You were earning commissions on real estate sales? I
was earning commission on real estate sales, and we were predominantly doing income-producing property sales, so apartment buildings, shopping centers. But at the time, we were probably the most active apartment broker in town, meaning we were representing sellers of apartment properties who were seeking to achieve a liquidity event or a disposition, and we did a lot of that. And we, as a broker, you all know what a real estate broker is. You're just you're an advisor. You're a middleman. You facilitate, you create, you market the property, and you bring about a transaction. So I was doing a good bit of that when I was practicing law and doing that as general counsel, and just again slowly found myself doing more and more on the business side and the brokerage side, and it was lucrative too. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, did you say you were like a real estate agent or a broker?
Both.
You were actually a broker, so you took the broker.
I did. I got my license, which you have to do first, and then 2 years after that, I was still with the Williamson Commercial Group. I knew I wanted to have my broker's license just in case, and I think at that time we had already started discussions about me potentially taking over, and you need to be a principal broker of a brokerage firm. You need to have that license. Also in property management, you need to have that license. So long story short, I started my firm, and I had a couple of people join me as associates, and I was lucky enough to find my way into a client who was doing development work for CVS Pharmacy. They were doing site selection, and so I office shared with them. I found any way I could to keep my costs down because I was starting a business from scratch, and as you can imagine, that's not just scary, but it's hard to do, and you want to keep your costs to a minimum. So anytime you can find a way to share office space or partner with your client and even share revenue in certain ways in joint ventures and otherwise, I was looking at any way I could to launch my business, and it was essentially incubated in that developer's office, and that probably lasted about 3 years. As I was growing my business, we started to do more and more independent work outside of the site selection work for the developer. We started doing a lot of apartment brokerage, and we were doing a little bit of everything in the services arena of real estate, meaning we were facilitating sales, we were doing leasing, we were doing advisory work, we would do opinions of value, just anything connected to commercial real estate.
Not property management, right?
Not at the time. Property management has come later. Property management is something I'm familiar with and have experience with, and it was for about 10 years. I started the company in 2004, and we really didn't touch property management for about 5 or 7 years. I wanted to stay really myopic and focused on developing the brokerage practice and really being laser-like focused on just brokerage. Property management is labor-intensive. You can imagine.
Right.
Your apartment property, you get a lot of
Collecting
calls,
rents, fixing refrigerators.
just reporting, financial reporting and everything. It's very
On the
labor.
brokerage side, you're not only putting buyers and sellers together, you're also helping locate properties for CBS and other
We
companies.
sure are.
Okay.
We're helping people, we're helping developers find appropriate sites. We're rendering it.
So Thornton's could have called you and said, found us a site.
Yep. In fact, we presented Dave Bridgers
Yeah.
on our board. We were presenting him a number of sites. We would have, for instance, an owner of, say, a single tenant property that may have gone dark call us to say, do you have a good use? And if it were a good corner, I'd call David and say, hey, what do you think of this? Or if it was a new development that had a good traffic flow, a good signalization, things.
And David Bridgers, just as an aside, so this is one of the reasons, it was not at all my reason. I had very idealistic reasons at 25 to volunteer to work for the Red Cross. As life goes on, you realize, well, there's some benefits in the sense that it integrates you in your community. So one of the people I met on the Red Cross board was David Bridgers, who's a graduate of this law school. He left. I think he practiced law with one of the medium-sized firms for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And old man Jim Thornton hires him because they needed an inside counsel. So he becomes general counsel, I bet, at least 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And he spends his whole career out there, happy as a clam. And he retired, I think, 2 years ago. But in the meantime, I've got this guy in my class coming along sort of like Bridgers did. And then he was a good student. We got to know each other. But then a number of years went by before I saw you, and suddenly he's on the Red Cross board with me along with David Bridgers. So it also links up.
It is. So, yeah, the lesson there, if there's a lesson, is don't be afraid to get involved. There's so many things that I hope that I don't know, that are helpful about today, and there's not enough time probably for me to share everything about all the mistakes I've made and all the things I've done. But so you feel free to share my contact information with the class. I'm happy to field questions. Call me anytime. I've been where you are, and I'm excited for you. But the one thing I will say, back to our point about getting involved, is you can go. I have so many degrees, it's almost embarrassing. I went and got an executive MBA late in life. You can be the smartest person in the room. You can be the most intelligent. You can be the most well-read. But it all comes down to relationships. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter how much you know.
You learned that a lot younger than I did. It literally, because I've raised children, right? You're raising children. You want them to make A's in school. You want them to be relatively decent at sports because you think that'll help them with their teamwork.
Yeah.
But it never occurred to me until probably 5 or 6 years ago that the relationships you have with others are more important than intellect or literary achievement. If you, in terms of, I don't know if that's true in terms of your own personal satisfaction, in terms of living life, it's pretty critical.
Definitely important in that sense, and it is also important selfishly in business. That's not really selfishly, it's just it really is true. So I would encourage you to think about that always. And I'm like you, I didn't know that. I would bang, I can remember banging up against the wall with a lot of people and not thinking, and then the other thing is, as a lawyer, you're trained, at least I was, not trained, but I felt like I had to know everything. And if I didn't know everything, I was scared to death. And it took me. I still maybe have a little bit of that today, but the sooner you can realize that you'll never know everything, and the value of relationships in so many ways. One important thing is you can always ask somebody, someone who may have a better aptitude for whatever it is you're seeking, and that's one of the many, many things about relationships in business and in life is you get this sense of relief that you don't need to be the smartest person. You don't need to know everything. You can't prepare for everything. You can do your best. And as lawyers, you're trained. As law students, you're being trained to think critically and differently. And I can tell you for sure that it is an excellent training for business and in life. But you let go of those sort of, I don't know, golden handcuffs isn't the right word, but let go of that sort of feeling that you gotta know everything, and embrace the idea of asking for help. And it's not a sign that you're inexperienced. It's actually, most people will find it endearing and trustworthy. And when you're dealing in transactions, I mean, I've been involved in so many business endeavors, from small little one-on-one transactions to as high as I served on the board of a publicly traded company, and we recently sold. And so I've seen the small, and I've seen how complicated it can be with investment bankers, and the complexity of the legal side of that kind of transaction. And at the end of the day, it is remarkable to me, no matter how sophisticated or unsophisticated, it all comes down to human beings that are no smarter than you and me. And some of them are less emotionally intelligent than you and me. And so at the end of the day, learning to embrace people and relationship building, it's a lifelong learning process in that regard. And I would just encourage you to have fun with that and embrace it now, especially when you're new and getting started in law or whatever you pursue, but even in later life when you're experienced, don't be afraid to reach out to people, because without the benefit of relationships, it's
tough.
It's impossible. It's impossible. So tell me, there's a few hands that were interested in non-traditional. I'm just curious to know a little bit more about that, and I'm happy to talk more about myself, but I would love to learn about you all, and then maybe wrap in some of my experiences into potentially helping what you're looking to achieve.
So my name's Austin Bates. I'm at 3L, and I'll take the DC bar in July, and then I come back here and do my MBA across the street. And then with their 1 year or 13-month program, it also has an internship. So I'll be doing business. I think it's going to be mergers and acquisitions for hopefully Baird or Humana, and from there maybe look at business consulting and get in that way.
Fantastic. Good for you. Good for you to get the. Do they still do the joint?
They do, but I decided late. For the purposes of the ABA or KBA, I think it's the ABA. It's not a dual degree. But for the business school across the street, they're treating it like a dual degree. So I'm getting the tuition reduction, but
And it used to be a dual degree. where
It
you-
still is.
Mhm.
It would be a year of law school here, then go over for the MBA, and then come back and finish out the law degree. But I didn't decide until this year.
I was talking to someone several months ago, actually, who did it years ago, like 15 years ago. And she said that the way it worked was that she was taking courses at the law school and business school at the same time,
That's right.
which was really fun. And she's since heard that they've sort of separated the years out.
Yeah, when I was in school, they did the joint degree, and you would flip, and I always thought, man, that's probably what I should do to give myself a break from this, the law school stuff.
That'd be great, yeah.
And I was just too scared. I just wanted to survive in law school, and I was like, I don't want to make that commitment to do both. And I honestly was a little scared. I was like, I just want to, barely hanging on to get through law school. But so I commend you for doing that. That joint, doing both. I ended up going back later in life and getting my executive MBA, and I wouldn't have done it any differently because I had the benefit of experience. But that's fantastic. Why the DC?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
Why the
Well,
DC bar?
There's no CLE.
There's what?
There's no CLE
Right.
requirement for DC.
Okay.
It's a little cheaper to maintain than Kentucky, and I don't really have any intention of practicing law
Okay.
unless I might need it for. Even then, I don't think I'm gonna use it. So for me, it's more of a capstone. I don't want to be continually paying for something.
I got you. Well, I took the DC bar, and it was the first year, so it was the first year of multi-state, so nobody ever had it before. So we were the guinea pig group. We had to go to Georgetown Law School. I think they still did the exam at Georgetown Law School. And I went in, and I finished like 2/3. I swore I flunked that thing. And I literally only finished 2/3 because I overanalyzed everything. So I did pass. But then after I passed, I'm telling some friends, hey, I passed the DC bar. And all these friends were out having beer, and they're all like, how stupid can you be? I said, well, I'm from Alabama. I don't know why, but I passed the test. I said, well, that's just stupid. They're all to a person saying that's just stupid. Why wouldn't you take them to Virginia bar, or the Alabama bar, the New York bar, and then you can just motion into DC? And at that point, the pass rate on the DC bar was like 50%. So I'm like, yeah, that was stupid. So I'm wondering, you have a good reason though. You're saying the reason you're doing the pass rates are high, are they a
Pass
little bit
rates
up
are-
now in DC?
I think they're pretty high.
And I had no CLE to stay a member of the DC bar. Yes, I'm still an active member of the DC bar, but you're right. So from a cost perspective, it makes sense. Maybe in the end I wasn't as stupid as I thought I was, but everybody else was then motioning in, so they would take Virginia or New York and then motion into DC. And I advise that for all of it. It's a good bar to be a member of, and it's not very costly.
You can always be a lobbyist too.
Right, here's how it also helped me, this is a short one mention. When I moved here, so after I took the DC bar, I had to take the Alabama bar in January or February. They then gave no credit for the new multi-state part. So I had to take a different multi-state all over again in January. But then when I got the job offer up here, I don't think you should be a law professor unless you're also active at the bar. So when I got here, I called Brant Hellman, you know that name,
Yeah.
who was real active in the bar. I said, Mr. Hellman, we don't really know each other. Someone said to call you. Oh, you just moved here from Alabama. You want to be a member of the Kentucky bar? I said, yeah, but I don't want to run the risk of failing the Kentucky bar exam. If I don't have to, I'll prepare and take it. But otherwise, it's just, I'm sorry, you can't motion in from Alabama because they don't have any reciprocity with Kentucky. Well, oh, but you remember the DC bar. But they have reciprocity, so I motioned in from DC to the Kentucky bar. So that's possible. I think you have to practice. There was a 5-year practice requirement which I had satisfied barely. But
So
doing a lot
that's
of
the other thing that
work.
I'm potentially open to is moving to DC after the MBA.
Gotcha.
If I were to work for one of the bigger consulting firms or something like that, and then I could feasibly practice in a small capacity
Sure.
and work up towards.
Where'd you say you're getting the MBA?
I hear it.
Here, okay, that's right.
Well, you'll get an enormous amount of experience if you join one of the consulting firms, and you will be exposed to a lot of great stuff. And so, take advantage of that and enjoy meeting your clients and learning. I always say I learn more from my clients than I learn in anything. And even though I'm maybe their advisor, I'm learning from them, and so
They
that's
think, the clients think you're the smartest guy in the room,
Yeah.
but typically it's the client.
it's the client too sometimes, yeah. And so I learn so much from my clients. So who else is thinking maybe even a traditional route? I would love to hear of it.
I'm Randy Strauss. I went finance undergrad at IU and then was going to go into banking and got talked out of it at the last second and came here. And like you said that you had your moment where you were sitting on the legal side of the table and you were talking to business people and you were like, oh, I want to be on that side of the table. I basically already had that moment where
Yeah.
I don't really have any desire to practice law. I would much rather just go into the business side straight away.
Well, good.
So I don't have as structured of a plan as that, but
Well, I
in
think
some capacity going business, working with startups maybe, or
yeah.
consulting or banking, really just anything but law.
Good for you. Well, I mean, I will tell you, you know this because you're already thinking that way, is that having the degree will give you a real advantage against competing candidates. You know, even if you haven't practiced, just having the degree, having the license, they will look at you as someone who maybe, obviously you have the discipline to get through law school, which isn't easy, especially I think it takes even more discipline when you're not passionate about practicing law necessarily. And so you're gonna do great things, and just, you know, be open to taking risks, and don't be afraid to practice law if you have to in the beginning to get in the door. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you know, a lot of folks that I encountered when I was at my that phase of my career in the beginning, they look at, if you're a lawyer, you are held to a higher standard. Sometimes that's unfair, it's, you know, a little bit, but it's true, and it should be true, because, you know, the idea of being a fiduciary is, I mean, it's important. It was important to me before law school, but learning how important it is to be someone else's fiduciary, and it's a lot of people, non-lawyers look at lawyers. Most of them in a way that, hey, this person understands a little bit more deeply, not only how to critically think, but how to be a fiduciary. And good. The world is your oyster. You have tons of choices, and
We'll see.
whether you're going to practice or not. Yeah. Somebody else?
Ethan.
Yeah.
So I also don't want to be a lawyer, but my husband and I are moving to Maine, so I'll be based out of the Northeast. I'm currently in the third round of hiring for a company that works with Fortune 500 companies. Basically what I would be is a business intelligence analyst. So I would be paired with a specific client based on my interest and the fit, and then I would create briefings every day for that client based on their interests in the media, but also from government white papers and all kinds of issues. So
Very, very interesting.
I'm not sure where I'll end up after that, but I'm really hopeful that I get this job, because I think I would be able to use my law degree in a different and more conventional way to serve clients' needs.
That's really
You have to
cool.
buy a good coat, though, won't you?
Oh yeah,
Yes,
for sure.
So are most of you all right out of college into law school, and most of you are second or third years, I assume?
Yeah.
Third years.
Most of third.
Okay. Did anybody in the class work before law school? Great. Where'd you work?
I worked at a woodworking business, actually.
Oh, cool.
So it wasn't anything like
Yeah.
white collar or anything like that.
Neat.
I graduated like in the fall from undergrad, so I couldn't. There was going to be some time in between requirements, so
Cool.
I decided just to make some money in between.
Yeah. Well, good. You just probably learned a ton about a
Yeah.
small business. I mean, learning about how small businesses are managed and run, even if you're mowing lawns or cutting wood or whatever, you know, you still learn a ton. What is your area of interest after law school? Do you want to join a firm in traditional?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. At least in the short term. I think long term, I want to work in house. That's
Yeah.
more like why I kind of got interested in law school.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to get into that area right away because they, seems like most in-house attorneys jump from firms like yourself, so.
Yeah, the trick is the corporations, you know, they want someone else's dime to pay for the training. So it's
Yeah.
a lot of times it's the law firms who are, you know, spending. The funny thing is it all comes back to the corporations because they're the ones who are getting billed for the junior associates. But that's a subject for another day. Be patient and do exactly what I would say you're doing, and maybe get a little practice under your belt, and you'll start meeting people. And don't be afraid to ask. So, entrepreneurialism is the name of the class. I would love to know why you all chose this elective, and tell me a little bit about that and about yourself.
My whole goal and things in the end would be is a natural resources kind of mining company, but they would like me to do property and securities type law.
Sure.
So trying to get all the business side. I really appreciate this class because it shows so many different avenues and just non-traditional things like you're saying. So I almost feel like a lot of us in here are not like a underrepresented kind of little group that we kind of want to do different things.
Right.
Not like a cult or
They were
anything.
cult,
But
that's cool.
Well, see,
So-
he had an office right outside my office for
yeah.
like a year.
Oh, no
He
way.
took over the table next to my
He's-
door.
Osmosis, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this law school will generally, and especially classes like this that are introducing you to capital formation and Reg D and things that you need to think about with regard to capital and debt and equity. It'll change your lens. It's already changing your lens, and you may not even know it. Your lens of the world and how you see the world, and that's a good thing. It's that's going to help you navigate. So that's cool. So you think you might join a natural resources firm, or it's a good place to be here in Kentucky? I don't know what your opinion is of coal, but
I'd check it out and see.
Yeah.
Hopefully. So.
well, if I can help, I have a good friend who works for a natural resources company that was purchased by some company out of Geneva, but they're based here in Kentucky. And he was a lawyer at Greenbaum, and then went from Greenbaum to a smaller firm, then out of that firm to be in-house counsel. And so,
Fred, you may not know it, but last week they had Chuck Schneider here. I guess it was last week or the week before.
Whoa.
And Chuck had a similar route in the sense that he went with a big firm, left to the garage-made pizza company, which was already pretty big at that point,
Yeah.
but was able to take it public. And then in the end, he says, you know what, I don't want to do this. You know, I want to own my own business. So he gets in with Mays, and they buy Heine Brothers together, and he's having a blast.
they're doing great. That's interesting.
What I didn't know was he also owns Skyline Chili, or a big part of it.
Good for him. I've never met him. I knew he was a lawyer, but
Yeah.
gosh, you all.
And he enjoys talking to the students too. He's
Yeah.
done it for the last 4 or 5 years.
Very cool. He's done a lot of great things. So I'm still climbing. So I'm still fighting the good fight. So maybe in some way that can be helpful too.
And one thing too that's awesome about the class is, like, from traditional classes, I'm a 2L, so 1L, it's like just so textbook, and this brings in all the, outside stuff that we're going to be doing and experience from y'all. And
I remember that all too well. That first year was just very standardized and prepares you a little, I guess, for the bar exam. But they did not have this. They had electives. I remember taking an environmental law class, but we didn't have entrepreneurialism or any.
No, when I first came here, 25 plus years ago, they asked if I wanted to develop any seminars. I said, well, what do you do? If you've got business orgs and securities reg, and I was doing a lot of research in European Union law, finance at the time, they would just make one up. I said, well, let's just call it like there were others in the curricula like special problems in constitutional law. So it gives a professor a lot of flexibility. So this started out as special problems in corporate law or something like that.
Cool.
But over a period of 10, 15 years, it evolved, and entrepreneur. I got to know more people in the community who were entrepreneurs who were actually out there doing this and actually working with lawyers, and sometimes the other way. So I've had Bill Strench here. He was here for about a month ago.
Yeah.
So both lawyers and entrepreneurs wanted to participate in the discussions in the classroom, and that's been a lot of fun. I think,
So
for
cool.
students and for me, and I think the entrepreneurs have a blast.
Oh, well, I know for me, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, just seeing your energy and being reminded that it's cool. And obviously, it's about helping too. I want to help and I want to learn too. So it's all good. Anybody else want to share their story?
I don't have a story, but I have a question.
Sure.
I was just curious if, because I do want to practice law, if you thought an MBA, if you want to practice, because I'm interested in maybe mergers or, securities, but I would eventually like to go in-house. If you felt like an MBA would be beneficial in that respect, like immediately, or if you would think it'd be better to wait, so kind of like till later on.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It's a personal choice in part kind of question, but I'll do my best to answer that from my perspective. If you're looking to be an M&A lawyer, you don't necessarily need an MBA. It can't hurt to know about the general business concepts and general finance concepts, but I'm sort of a big fan of focusing. I've had trouble in my experience. When you don't focus, you kind of trip up. So if you really want to do the M&A and large business transaction work as a lawyer, be the best you can be in that regard. I'm also this is personal for me, and maybe it's helpful to you as you think about it as your career advances. But I wanted to get the degree later in life, and it was probably born out of a little bit of fear and wanting to stay focused, but also born out of the idea that I wanted to just learn a little bit more in the streets, learn by doing a little bit more, and then go back to school and bring that experience back to an MBA program. And it's been that MBA program 15 years after I was removed from, not quite 15, well, maybe it was almost 15 years after law school, and I had all those years of experience. It made that MBA that much more impactful.
Plus you could afford it.
And I can afford it, yeah. And the MBA now, they make it accessible to a lot of folks. And kind of back to what I said in the beginning, is never be afraid to educate yourself. I know it's expensive, and time is your greatest capital, and so the amount of time and money you spend, but you'll never regret it, and you'll always be able to use it in life and in business. And with regard to the MBA, you be a great M&A lawyer, and then if you want to learn a little bit more about the theory side of business and the practice of business and the MBA, and you can do that later in life, and you can do it part-time even. And I think it'll make you a better, more engaged MBA student, because you'll have that deep background on the law side. Yeah, hope it helps. Somebody else want to share their goals? Or no?
Sure, I'll share mine. So after I graduated from undergrad, I worked about a year at an advertising agency, Creative Alliance, Schenectady.
Oh yeah, wow. Great firm.
And it was, it was intense. There was a lot of deadlines that we had to juggle all the time. And so after that, I decided I wanted to go get my master's in communication. And so I got my master's from U of L, and that was about 2 years. And while I was there, I took a class that was about crisis communication and how to deal with crises as they arise within a company, and the message you should put forward, and how there were legal implications that had to deal with those messages. And that sort of attracted me to the law, because we briefly sort of discussed that area, and so then I was attracted to applying to U of L, and I got accepted. And while I've been here, I've been really drawn towards litigating, as well as doing sort of commercial transactions. my uncle just asked me to like draft a contract that he's gonna give to his attorney, of course, to review, to help sell his business. And I was actually gonna ask you, you said that when you're when the owner of the Williamson Commercial Group approached you to buy the business, and you were going to structure it like, I forgot what you called it. It was owner's financing?
We were looking at it all kinds of different ways. Either I was going to go get debt and equity and buy it, or we could do some sort of installment deal where I made, or maybe we even thought about maybe let me buy a smaller equity stake first and then see how it goes. But seller financing was to me the best creative way to do it at the time. I don't think I could have gone out and I could and I didn't even know about. You're learning about in this class, and it took me a million years to learn about. It's not just going to get that debt; it's going to get that the other source of capital, the equity, and going out to investors and asking them to help you do something. So, I guess back to your question is yes, we did talk deeply and look at structuring even in a contract an owner financed sale where each year I would be paying a portion of the sale price.
Is there, besides from the buyer's perspective, I guess what would be the benefit, what's the benefit? I guess the owner's benefit would be the sort of the legacy that he had discussed, like the transition to the next phase of ownership. But for me, I guess that's concerning because there is so much, like the owner is essentially acting as the bank, and there is that, liability that if for some reason the buyer.
Sure.
So
You're very intuitive to understand where the risk is, and that's one of the things that is so valuable as your training in law school is, and in business and in law, frankly, it's all about assessing risk so you can underwrite a business decision or a personal decision even. So yes, it was risk to him that the purchase price may not necessarily be paid. It was frankly being paid out of the business that he created. Now
and you could destroy his business.
And I could, it could, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We see a lot of owner finance and seller finance transactions that didn't go very well because there's great risk to taking yourself out of day-to-day management and putting someone else in place, and they may manage it differently so that income stream and cash flow changes. The benefits to the owner are income stream, retirement income, and there's some tax advantages potentially to structuring it in that way versus a lump sum. That could be available. But a lot of smaller businesses that don't necessarily have an audience or a marketplace of buyers, with, let's say, their revenue may not meet a certain threshold, it may be below a certain threshold. They're just smaller businesses, like lots of businesses that make up this economy are, and so having some mechanism with which you can retire from 30 years of building something, and you've built a great income stream, and you want to leave day to day, you're ready, and you trust someone. There are certain benefits. My father practiced dentistry for 30 years, and he ended up structuring an owner finance sale to a young new dentist who came in and paid essentially through a seller finance transaction over 5 years, and so it worked well, but there was real risk to him. And
did your father, was the note that your father took from the legacy secured by a pledge of the stock?
It was secured by the pledge of the stock. It was also secured by the business assets.
Because that's what I was going to recommend to him, that he should file a financing statement on his assets, on the business assets, to show that he is the first creditor.
Yes. Yeah. Now you're talking about representing the buyer or the seller? Or
That would be the seller, my uncle. Well,
yes.
I would just draft a contract and give
Yeah.
him.
Well, you're thinking the right
Family
way.
advice.
You wanna secure as best you can, collateralize as best you can, the promise, the indebtedness.
Right.
So the question is, can the corporation pledge its assets to support a loan to a third party who's acquiring the stock from not the corporation, but from your father or uncle? That gets a little trickier.
That gets trickier. It depends on if they're an LLC, and it depends on what the governing law,
There's certainly a pledge of stock if there's a default, it's not cured in 10 days.
Right.
You can get the business back.
You want to think about you're doing exactly the right thing. You're thinking of every potential risk and how can you document and perfect as best you can, protecting and mitigating those risks. You can't eliminate them, but you can do your best to document that. And even you don't necessarily have to be a great experience.
Corporation LLC. So that's one of the interesting questions, Fred. If you can talk about this, not to put you on the spot, but I have long been an advocate since I always saw LLCs as a tax scheme. In the beginning, that's how they originated, was to solve the guy's tax problems out in Wyoming.
Yeah.
And Strench and I, over the last 25 years, said, a lot of my documents, even when I do an LLC, it looks like a corporation. We have a board of directors, we have shareholders, we have annual meetings, blah, blah, blah. And finally, the other night, I had dinner with Bill, and I said, well, is it really, I know it's the default form now, but should it be anymore? And he says, I worry about that every week. He says, I'm not sure. And what really finished me off on LLCs was section 1202 of the Internal Revenue Code, which we've talked about. I know we've had exposure to it, but it's a qualifying small business, which is a pretty big business, under 100 million, under 50 million. It covers a lot, under 100 million. Huh? So it doesn't apply to reporting companies, but to any other company, say Sean O'Leary's coming here in a few weeks, and Sean starts Edge Analytics, let's say, and says, Manny, I need you to put 50 grand in my business, or 100 grand in my business. If I don't sell it for 5 years, you hold the stock, or you hold the stock for at least 5 years, then when we do sell the business or someone acquires your stock, there is zero tax at the state or federal level. No capital gains, no income, nothing. It's tax-free. So, but it only applies to corporations.
Yeah.
So if your uncle's business, presumably was a corporation, he sells at a big price to a third party that's payable over a period of years. I mean, that's a much better retirement plan.
That's a big deal. And back in the day, the LLC was promoted as the most flexible.
Right. It was contractual.
It was contractual. You had this operating agreement that was a living, breathing document, and it was less formal, maybe.
Yeah,
but
less formal.
Nowadays, I agree with you that we end up doing everything within the LLC as just like a C corp or an S corp, and we, from a tax perspective, you have to even choose how do you want to be treated. How do you want to be treated? But in any event,
it would create a solid problem that doesn't really exist any longer.
Probably not, yeah, and it has created a lot. You're right, probably a lot of tax revenue.
And the lawyers, when I get all over Rutledge, because we have a 100-page operating agreement, so nobody can understand this thing except you.
Yeah. That's right.
It's job security.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I hope that helps in
It does.
some way.
It does, thank you, yeah.
Did you do have you done any private placements? This guy's interested in that, and she's interested in that.
I have, not as a lawyer. Maybe as a little bit as a lawyer. I might have touched a little bit, but we've raised money, and we certainly did a offering memorandum, and we did everything we thought we needed to do to check the box to comply with Reg D, and we also we learned the hard way that we should also be communicating with the Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions to make sure that
the securities division.
we're exactly, yeah. It's not just the federal with the state, and so we've done a number of those, and some of the smaller real estate transactions that we have raised equity on. didn't necessarily, I believe, require Reg D. Say if we were raising less than $1 million, maybe a little bit less, is there still an exemption for?
Yeah, virtually no one uses it anymore. Yeah, there was 504.
Where you didn't
Rule
necessarily have to
504.
comply, but my thought as a lawyer, I always said, it doesn't matter whether we're exempt, we still want to meet as many elements as we can of the law, meaning full disclaimers and full disclosures and sources of uses of
Acknowledgement
funds.
that they receive full disclosure and so forth.
And that
yeah.
they're an accredited investor and that they have sought tax advice and
Yeah.
just all of the things that regulations require you to do. It's always smart. I mean, when you're a steward of someone else's money, when you're asking to raise money for your own venture, whether you're a lawyer or a principal, you know, it's just super important to